I wake to a click and a hum, the cockpit's heartbeat. I'm a Fairchild A100A cockpit voice recorder bolted into the tail of a McDonnell Douglas MD-83, registration N963AS. My job is simple: listen without judgment, remember without forgetting. When the avionics come alive, so do I, spooling magnetic ribbon and catching every syllable, every chime, every breath over the Pacific. Today, we're Alaska Airlines Flight 261, scheduled Puerto Vallarta, San Francisco, Seattle. 2 pilots up front, Captain Theodore Ted Thompson and First Officer William Bill Tansky, 3 flight attendants in back, and 83 passengers buckling in under the tropical glare. 88 souls. I do not feel the heat. I only keep the record. The door closes with that hollow, padded thud. Safety demo murmurs through the bulkhead, a syncopation under the pilot's checklist cadence. Battery on. Hydraulics set. Fuel quantity checked. Checklists are liturgy here: call, response, acknowledgement. I learn the patterns of voices the way a stethoscope learns a patient. The captain's confident baritone, the first officer's crisp rhythm, the occasional intercom chirp from the cabin. Puerto Vallarta ground gives us taxi instructions. A tug of thrust rolls rubber into motion. On the runway, the engines rise, JT8D219s coughing, then roaring into a clean, metallic bellow. The acceleration sounds like a zipper pulled through the air. Rotate! The main gear thumps free, the gear doors close, and just like that, I'm listening to a room suspended in sky. We climbed away at 1337 PST, a line of sea and light tilted beneath us toward California. Cruise at flight level 310 is usually a quiet symphony. Air hiss, autopilot clicks, check-ins with center, galley carts rattling forward with a soft percussion of ice. But quiet doesn't mean nothing happens. Quiet means the system is doing its part. The MD-83's horizontal stabilizer, an all-moving surface trimming the nose for comfort, earns only a soft electric whir when it moves. I've heard that whir countless times on countless legs. Today, for a time, I do not hear it. What I do catch is something subtler. The pilot's working a little harder for level. In the drift of cockpit small talk, one line hardens into focus. Words about trim, about the stabilizer not cooperating. It's not panic. These men have flown tens of thousands of hours, but there's the grain of a problem finding its edge. Let's talk to maintenance. Company frequency crackles alive, voices across states stitched through HF and VHF. The phrase is jammed stabilizer. That's not a cabin rumor. That's a headline in the making if it stays jammed. Procedures come out like a well-worn map. Primary trim, alternate trim, check breakers, think about diverting. I absorb it all, ink without opinion. The captain and first officer speak in sentences that end in solutions. If this, then that. They test. They wait. They test again. It's harder to keep the jet exactly where they want it. I can hear it in the strain around their words, in the timing between the dings and the acknowledgements, in the way they narrate their own hands. I've got it, as if to keep the machine honest. Air traffic control is the steady metronome under the troubleshooting. I hold those calls too, requests for block altitude, vectors that keep them out to sea, so whatever comes next happens over water, not over homes and boulevards. There's a moral clarity in that decision that doesn't show up in schematics. If you must fight, fight where the risk to the people below is least. They plan a diversion south to Los Angeles. Bigger runways, more fire trucks, more hands. The conversation is methodical, almost gentle, like guiding a fevered child back to bed. I hear them consider and decline any further gymnastics with the trim until they can get lower, slower, safer. In the background, life continues. A flight attendant calls the cockpit. Service questions, passenger comfort, a discreet probe for, "Are we okay?" They are told only what helps. There's a mechanical issue, nothing for the cabin to manage. We're taking precautions, we'll keep you informed. In my tape, those sentences land like warm blankets. The passengers never hear us. Their world is beverages and views and page turns and that steady white noise that makes you think an airplane is a living creature purring. I know differently. An airplane is 1,000 promises made of metal and grease and timing, overseen by people determined to keep every one of them. I'm here for when some small promise buckles. In my coils, I'm already collecting the preface to an investigation. The time we left, the altitude we flew, the decision points spoken aloud, so the future will know what the present attempted. The MD-83's design, the maintenance intervals, the oversight, none of that exists in my awareness yet. I do not know the name jackscrew, though one day it will be said in courtrooms and classrooms and living rooms with the gravity of a verdict. Today, I only hear cause and effect as it registers in human voices. Level at the lower altitude, the captain rehearses the plan. Work a checklist, configure clean, prove control authority before we approach concrete. Their discipline sounds like music, call-outs, confirmations, cross-checks. I hear a smile when ATC offers anything they need. Pilots laugh in these moments, not because anything is funny, but because humor melts the ice on the steps in front of you. Humanity is part of the procedure. For all my memory, I have no imagination, but I can tell you this. In some cockpits, the air gets sharp and jagged when trouble shows up. Not here. Here, the room tightens into professionalism. The captain narrates intentions. The first officer backs him up. The airplane, our airplane, responds enough to keep options open. My tape rolls on. Somewhere far below, waves scallop into the California coastline, and people on beaches shade their eyes at a speck that is just another flight sliding down the sky. I am the witness in the wall. I am not hope, and I am not fear. I am continuity. If there is something to learn, I will carry it through salt and pressure and darkness until hands retrieve me and ears hear what was said. For now, I listen to two pilots doing what they were born and trained to do. Fly the airplane, manage the abnormal, buy time. And in the quiet between checklists, I hear what you cannot see. Resolve braiding itself into a rope, strong enough to hold back gravity for one more minute, and then another. This is how it begins. I keep recording because that is my only answer to doubt. The cockpit settles into a rhythm I can measure by breath and by checklist. The decision is made. Divert to Los Angeles. I hold the words in iron oxide and silence. Their request for lower altitude, vectors over water, time to think. The captain says it plainly, like a promise to the cabin they can't yet make. We'll keep it smooth. The first officer echoes, already building the plan 2 or 3 steps ahead. Speed, configuration, how to manage the descent without the usual help from the trim. I take in the incidental sounds that carry meaning only when trouble is in the room. The trim switch clicked with a thumb, but yielding no whir from the tail. The autopilot's soft, unmistakable chirp as hands retake the airplane. The dry rustle of a checklist being turned back to a page. Pilots rarely visit outside simulators. They run the procedure as written. Primary trim, alternate trim, circuit breakers verified, control forces assessed. Nothing is rushed. I hear a pencil scratch an altitude on the captain's knee board. The code for an approach we might fly. Voices are steady. 2 professionals standing in a doorway, keeping the weather outside. Company maintenance is in their ears now. Calm, clipped, trying to be helpful without touching the airplane. Jammed stabilizer, the captain says, and that phrase sits in me like a stone. The answers coming back are the choreography of abnormal. Avoid aggressive inputs. Keep the airplane in a corner where airspeed and altitude make any surprise survivable. Consider a manual retrim if the load allows. The first officer reads back what matters. Both pilots repeat the essential points aloud. Repetition is a safety net woven from sound. Time folds. A flight attendant checks in. The captain's voice is composed warmth. There's a mechanical issue. We're diverting as a precaution. Please secure the cabin and keep everyone comfortable. My tape stores the pause after the call ends. In that pause, both men look, not with eyes, but with experience, at the mental model of a jet that does not want to change its mind. Then the airplane answers. It's not a Hollywood explosion. It's a noise with flavor, metal freeing metal. A muted clunk that carries more history than volume. The next sound is the air itself, wind clawing at the fuselage as the nose pitches forward with hungry authority. The first officer's "I've got it" overlaps the captain's "You've got it." Then, "I've got it." Control passing like a relay baton in fractions of a second. The autopilot is already out. I catch the quick double chirp of its disengaged tone anyway, artifact of hands moving at speed. Cabinet doors rattle, a pen skitters across a surface. The pitch forces spike. Someone grunts with the effort of hauling a machine back into a human envelope. Down we go. The altimeters warble, announcing what the windows would confirm if my place weren't deep in the tail. Pacific sky turning into Pacific water. The captain calls for power changes. The first officer steadies the fall into a flown maneuver rather than a tumble, their voices braided over the background roar. The seatbelt chime punctures the storm, distant, as if the cabin itself were reminding the front office that 86 other lives are on the same tightrope. The interphone stays mercifully silent now. The crew in back will feel the drop and do exactly what training taught them: secure, brace, calm. There's a moment, no more than a breath, when the unnatural creak of structure flexing rides on top of the white noise. Every airplane talks like this when pushed. Most of the time, no one is listening at this volume. The first officer calls an attitude, the captain calls a speed. They are both doing math so fast it sounds like instinct. The descent shallows. Wind goes from a scream to a shout. Someone exhales. Okay, it's a word I've stored 1,000,000 times, but never this heavy. They have it. Not solved, not settled, but controlled. Nose re-raised, wings making honest lift, descent rate tamed from catastrophe into urgency. The captain's tone shifts from wrestling to fencing, still fighting, now choosing moves. "We're going to LA, he says again, this time to a different audience, themselves. The first officer acknowledges and asks for vectors that keep them over water. I record center's voice turning into approach control's voice, a handoff that in other flights is routine. Here it is a chain of guardians. Checklists return, not because paper saves airplanes, but because discipline does. They talk about keeping the center of gravity where they can best command it. No unnecessary fuel moves, no surprises in the back. They speak once about flaps and leave the question open on purpose. Until they are sure how the jet behaves at slower speeds, they will not commit to a configuration that might force the stabilizer to do what it cannot. I absorb the reasoning, the way you absorb a weather front through a window pane. They test the trim in microscopic nudges, feelers extended into the dark, a muted click, a breath, no motion, another click the same. The captain tries a different technique, pressure on the control column to unload the stabilizer, then a call to try it now. For a half heartbeat, the electric motor answers with a fractional whir that dies as quickly as it began, like a fish nosing a hook and darting away. Negative, the first officer says. The panel is honest. The tail is not coming to the party. LAX is closer now. Approach offers any runway, any sequence, priority through a sky full of afternoon traffic. The captain asks for a long final and a speed window that keeps them fast enough for authority, but not so fast that the forces outpace the pilot's muscles. They take a block altitude again, and I hear the map redraw in their heads. Where to intercept, where to decide if the feel of the airplane makes landing a safe act or a bet. "We'll take a look," is how the captain frames it. And in that sentence lives the core of their profession. Curiosity yoked to caution. The cabin calls once more, voice tight but professional. What should we tell them? "Tell them we're landing in Los Angeles," the captain answers. "Tell them it might be firm." The chuckle that follows is not humor. It's a pressure valve hissing open for a second and closing. The first officer adds, And we'll need them ready. The interphone clicks off. I store the click. We level briefly in a slice of sky the airplane likes. I can hear hands flexing, shoulders rolling, tiny adjustments you make before lifting something heavy again. The captain briefs the arrival in plain language. No mystique, no bravado. If the airplane behaves, they'll fly a normal path with small margins. If it misbehaves, they'll go around and reconsider, perhaps try to find a speed-trim combination that sits in the narrow space between too fast to flare and too slow to command. There is nothing theatrical here, only the cold light of what is. Then, as if to remind them that plans are written on water, the tail speaks again. Not the clean snap of a jam freeing, but a wavering tremor that telegraphs looseness where there should be authority. The nose wants to fall. The effort to hold it is back. More stubborn now, the force is changing with a will of their own. "Here we go," the first officer says, and I write it down. In the cabin, drinks find floors, books find aisles, hands find armrests. Up front, palms find texture in the yoke that no simulator can replicate. The captain calls for power again, for pitch, for patience. He buys a little time with attitude and thrust, enough to make one more call to approach. "We're going to need more room." They get it immediately, the scope clearing like a lane parted for an ambulance. Through it all, what I capture most clearly is not the noise, not the checklist, not the procedural fidelity. It is the respect these two have for the machine and for each other. No talking over, no blame, no fiction, just the constant living question. What is the airplane telling us now, and how do we answer without breaking it or ourselves? I don't know the words jackscrew yet. I don't know the maintenance histories and the courtrooms and the hearings that will one day replay my memory line by line. I only know the feeling of a system leaving the envelope of normal and demanding a pilot's full humanity, skill, judgment, temperament. If I were anything but tape and metal, I would call it courage. Instead, I call it data, and I keep rolling. We are pointed toward Los Angeles. The shoreline is a shape they can see now, not only a controller's vector. But between sea and concrete lies the test that will decide which story this day writes, an abnormal landing or something no checklist was ever built to complete. I keep the seconds like beads on a string, one after another until meaning appears. Los Angeles' approach is in their ears now, offering a sky cleared as if for royalty, priority vectors, long final, any runway they want. The captain chooses distance. Distance is time, and time is a tool when the airplane is writing its own rules. I absorb the cadence of their thinking, simple words that mean complicated decisions. Keep the speed where the controls still have authority. Don't ask the tail for favors it can't grant. Buy room for a go-around if the airplane shows teeth on short final. A cabin call. The senior flight attendant's voice is steady. Practice calm over uncertainty. What do we tell them? The captain answers with clarity, not drama. We're diverting to Los Angeles. We'll be landing soon. Please secure the cabin. Give the briefing for a firm arrival. It's not quite the word brace, but the idea circles the room like a bird that hasn't landed yet. I store the click when the interphone goes quiet. Behind it, I can almost hear aisles being cleared, carts latched, eyes meeting eyes. The first officer tries the trim again in microscopic tastes. A half-second nudge, the fingertip click that on a normal day would draw a neat electric whir from the tail. Nothing. They try unloading the stabilizer with forward pressure, then another nudge. For an instant, I hear a ghost of motion, like a motor finding a path through sand before the sand closes again. "No good," he says. And the captain confirms with a low acknowledgement meant for the room, for the tape, for the post-flight report they still hope to write. Wind, sculpted by the Pacific, presses on the fuselage with that glassy, late-afternoon firmness unique to winter in Southern California. The captain sets power, and the soundscape levels into a holdable place. Neither the whisper of idle nor the howl of escape. They talk about flaps like diffusing a wire, choose the wrong sequence, and the airplane may ask the stabilizer for a move it cannot make. "Let's see how it feels," the captain says, and the first officer is already ready with call-outs, speed, attitude, any change in control force. When the selection comes, it's a whisper of motor and a change in the tone of air around us. The nose asks to dip, then thinks better of it. They catch it with elevator and a breath you could mistake for relief if you weren't measuring voices for a living. Approach clears them to descend on a profile tailored to their abnormal, a shallow stair step that keeps the energy inside a box their hands can hold. "You're number one," the controller says. A line of jets peels away, room opening ahead like a corridor lit at the end. The first officer reads a short list of do-nots. No more trim tests, no big configuration changes, no chasing the needles if the needles are asking for what the tail can't give. The captain answers with the do's. Keep it fast, but not too fast. Keep it straight. Keep it smooth enough that the cabin stays quiet and ready. Then comes the sound I've learned to hate today. A tremor in the background that isn't air, isn't engine, isn't gear. It's the airplane's spine, letting them feel the tail where their instruments won't. A vibration that begins shy and then finds its voice. Not violent, not large, just wrong. The captain freezes the picture. "Hold it here." And the first officer does the small dance with power and pitch that keeps wrong from becoming worse. They declare the emergency now, formally. Not because fear has arrived, but because clarity has. Words that were implied become explicit, giving everyone, from radar scopes to firehouses, permission to act like this is as serious as it sounds. The controller's tone changes in the tiniest way I can detect, a shade deeper, a half-beat more deliberate on the numbers. He offers a straight-in. They accept. The ocean is beneath and ahead. The coast is a darker line against fading light. I hear the cabin crew in a distant, practiced chorus. Belts tight, seats upright, electronics off, shoes on. Their last pass down the aisle will always be in my memory as a sequence of clicks, latches, carts, galley doors, the tiny mechanical affirmations of order before contact with concrete. Up front, the captain briefs the landing in words so clean they feel like carving. Aim long, keep a little extra speed for elevator authority, let it be firm. If anything feels like it's moving where it shouldn't, go around early rather than wish later. The first officer reads the parts of the checklist that make sense for this airplane as it exists right now, and leaves the rest to the margin of the page. A box unchecked is not negligence, it is respect for reality. Approach offers wind, runway lights on full, a glide path like a neon rope. They join it from above, easing into its slope as if merging onto a freeway with an unreliable steering rack. The airplane, for a handful of beats, is good. Work, but good. Something like normal visits the room and sits in the corner. The first officer allows himself one line that sounds like Hope's cousin. "This could work." The captain answers with the smallest of nods you can hear. They try another tiny configuration step, exactly as briefed, exactly as timed, to see if could work can become will. The tail answers with a deeper shudder, as if a gear slipped a tooth somewhere no one can reach. The nose presses again toward down. The correction comes faster now, stronger, sleeves of muscle recruited to help hydraulics that a minute ago were enough. They stop the change, freeze the picture. It holds. The corridor of lights widens a fraction. The runway is not a concept anymore, but a surface with texture. In the cabin, silence is a live thing. A child asks a question in a voice too small to carry to the front. A stranger's hand finds another stranger's hand and stays there. The attendants take their jump seats and pull straps across vests that are rarely more than training props. They bow their heads, not in surrender, but in the specific prayer of professional hope. Let our practice meet this day. I listen for the trim motor without meaning to, like listening for a heart that has missed beats. It does not sing. Instead, I catch micro-gestures. The tick of the seatbelt sign as it cycled to be sure, the tiny rattles as loose items find purchase, the soft clack of the captain's ring against the yoke when he repositions his grip. These are the small human artifacts an investigation never charts, but they tell the story of how people meet the edge. The first officer calls the localizer alive. The glide slope centers, then breathes. The captain says they'll keep it a little high, a little fast, a little deliberate. He asks the controller for one more mile, and the sky gives it to them. The city glows to the left, like a constellation that forgot its pattern. To the right is pure black water. Then a new note, not the grumble of structure or the voice of air, but a mechanical report from the back of the airplane where I live. It is faint, but it has intent, the kind of sound a part makes when it wants to be two parts. The first officer feels it before the instruments confess. He tightens everything that can be tightened with hands: power, pitch, resolve. Holding, he says. And that single word has the weight of 1,000 pounds of force translated into breath. The captain's next sentence is part briefing, part benediction. If this holds, we land. If it moves again, we go. He says it for me, for the record, for whoever will comb this day for the thread that runs through it. Their minds hold both futures at once like a coin spun on a tabletop, light on one face and dark on the other. The runway is now a geometry problem with a time limit. Approach hands them to tower, voices change again, identities trading places while the mission stays singular. Get them down. At 4 miles, the tail murmurs. At 3, it quiets. At 2, the airplane flies like a gentleman remembering his manners. The first officer's hands are perfect doors that draft no wind. The captain's voice trims the approach with syllables. Here, now, just so. And then, just when the picture seems settled enough to believe in, the sound returns with a new color, a tremor that doesn't ebb. A pressure in the pitch forces like a tide turned against a swimmer. The nose leans into down as if invited. It was not. The correction is immediate, but the airplane answers with its own insistence. I record the strain in tendons, the scrape of shoes on rudder pedals, anchoring bodies for leverage, the deepening roar as power comes in to trade fuel for precious moments of control. Go around, the captain says, cleanly, without a molecule of panic, and in that word lives the refusal to make the runway a trap. The first officer is already there, engines answering, the nose asking rude questions, and the elevator replying with all the courtesy it can muster. The coin on the tabletop wobbles. I keep the seconds. I keep all of them. The call is clean and final, go around. Power rises, first a swell, then a controlled surge. Engines lifting their voices to shoulder the weight the tail won't carry. The airplane should answer by pitching up, joining thrust to climb. Instead, I feel the opposite written into the airframe. The nose wants down with a stubbornness that ignores good sense and good hands. Elevator pulls, hydraulics strain, the yoke finds the hard stop of physics and leans into it. This is not a finesse problem anymore. This is force against failure. I am a recorder, not a thinker, but even in magnetized iron I can tell the margins are thin. You can hear it in how the captain and first officer talk now. No extra words, no theory, just act, confirm, act. Thrust comes up to trade fuel for authority. The first officer holds a pitch picture that keeps us a blink from surrender. The captain trims with muscle, not switches, easing pressure so a human can still fly a machine that has forgotten which way is up. A tremor lives in the tail, small at first, a vibration like a coin buzzing on a tabletop. It walks forward into the cabin, a shudder you don't have to be a pilot to feel. Loose items answer, a chorus of tiny impacts and slides. The autopilot's opinion doesn't matter anymore. Hands are the only truth. A warning tone taps at the edge of the room and goes silent, not so much resolved as drowned by larger needs. The ocean tilts in some window I cannot see. They push for climb. The airplane replies with pitch that feels like a hinge greased with sand. Any small change in speed or flap angle makes the forces shift in ways that feel personal. Together, the two in front keep the picture inside a narrow hallway of okay. The go-around is no longer a textbook maneuver. It's a negotiation with a partner who keeps changing the deal. Power, set, attitude, speed. A litany that in peacetime flies an approach. In wartime, it buys seconds. The captain calls for configuration only as written in their earlier pact, as little as necessary, only when the airplane is ready to hear it. They test the request like a toe in cold water. The tail answers in a deeper voice, a rumble that says the mechanism that once held us in line has slipped another tooth. The airplane pitches hard. Down, the kind of down that drags the stomach of 100 people toward the floor. The first officer hauls, the captain adds thrust, the horizon, wherever it is not cooperating. A rattle sings through the fuselage like the sound of a flag in a gale. In my corner of the tail, I feel the violence coded into vibration, structure flexing within its design, but skirting the edges. Someone groans with effort. Someone keeps breathing on purpose to keep hands from going rigid. We do not fall so much as get pulled. Nose low, then lower. The go-around becomes a save. The captain keeps the engine song high to feed the elevator any bite it can buy. The first officer holds a pitch that is both too little and the most anyone can command. I hear flight attendants calling their own names, the ritual of readiness before impact that they practice in classrooms and hope never to say out loud up here. They are seated now. Harnesses hot across their shoulders, eyes on doors that are still just doors, not exits onto the sea. Something changes in a way even I can label. The tail lets go. Not completely. If it did, this would already be over, but enough that control forces mutate. The airplane lurches as if a latch popped in a locked room. The nose, desperate for down, gets its say. We pitch through a boundary into the kind of dive pilots practice under blue-painted ceilings and never expect to meet by name. Air claws at skins and seams. The engine note thickens, the tone that says speed is accruing in the wrong way. They are not passengers in this. They fight with technique, not panic. The captain speaks in measures. Power here, relief there. Don't chase, hold. The first officer flies with the whole upper body now. The yoke telegraphs a living thing's resistance. A table in the galley turns into noise and then into silence as it finds a wall. Somewhere, unseen, a bag flattens beneath another bag and stays that way forever. The wings find a symmetry in the buffet, a yaw that wants to breed into a roll. Corrected, firm like a parent guiding a child away from traffic, then corrected again as the air changes its mind foot by foot. The sound in the tail deepens from tremor to thrum. I recognize patterns in failures only as echoes. This is the echo of metal operating outside the kindness of tolerances. What once was a threaded marriage of parts is now friction and hope. They level the pitch enough to make a second decision, keep trying to land or refuse the runway's gravitational pull toward forcing a picture that isn't safe. The captain is the first to insult pride. He chooses the sky again. We're not taking it like this, is the sense. Even if the words are more economical, it is the harder choice because it drags the unknown back into the cockpit. Landings end things. Go-arounds extend them. The controller's voice reaches them with lines cleared and intentions understood. Say intentions is asked and answered. Their intention is the same as everyone's. Stable airplane first, then concrete. If the airplane refuses the first part, they will not gamble the second. They're vectored out again over water, black now, a giant's mirror, given the breathing room that humans need and machines sometimes won't grant. They try to ease the load off the elevator with a careful blend of power and pitch, the only trimming left when the tail refuses to share the work. For a clutch of seconds, the picture holds. Then the roll builds, not a lazy lean, but a purposeful slide. The first officer arrests it. The captain backs the play with power and rudder, classic stick and rudder in a jet that would much prefer to be trimmed and polite. The cabin, that village of strangers, becomes a ring of private decisions. Belts pull tight, heads lower. A hand finds a shoulder and squeezes once, a kind of punctuation. One attendant calls the final words of the briefing that are never said unless the world has turned a corner. Head down, feet back, stay down. I do not hear fear in her voice. I hear duty compressing into a single perfect shape. Up front, talk shrinks to centimeters. Numbers are called not as comforts but as allies. They are inside the narrowest tunnel of possible. Every solution you want, dump fuel, change configuration, slow down, asks the tail to do something it can't. So they fly the only airplane they have, this one right now with its stiff neck and stubborn heart. There is grace in that, and I trap it along with the terror. The left wing softens first. It's not a stall in the simple textbook way, but a loss of harmony that tugs the airplane toward an attitude where wings don't understand lift the way they did a breath ago. Caught. Then a nudge back from the other side. Caught. The roll stops being a suggestion and becomes a plan. The horizon, imagined or seen, tilts. Feet press into pedals, thighs brace against seats. Voices keep their volume while meaning sharpens into a point. I feel the moment we cross into the looking-glass world. Wings, not where wings belong. Nose carving through air with the certainty of mass more than the consent of design. Inversion is not dramatic in sound, it is a reordering of noise. Items that used to rattle on floors now strain against bins, harnesses bite. The engines don't care about up and down, only inlet and outlet. And so they sing on even as gravity changes who it loves. The first officer flies an upside-down airplane with the calm of someone who has practiced for things he'll never meet. The captain feeds him what he can, configurations to avoid, attitudes that keep control surfaces in whatever bite of air they still own. Together they claw a path back toward the edge of possible. It almost looks like it could work, almost, for the space of a sentence. Then the tail speaks one last time in the language of failure, a grinding absence more than a sound, and the nose writes its signature into the dark. I keep rolling. That is what I was made to do. Even as the vertical picture steepens into numbers that live in training but not in life, even as structure sings out its complaint, even as voices narrow to syllables shaped like prayers and procedure, I take it all. Not for spectacle, not for blame, but because the future demands we tell the truth about the present. There is water ahead. There is sky behind, between a battle fought with every right decision two people can make and a machine that has simply run out of forgiveness. If there is a grace note, it is this. They are not passengers of their fate. They fly it to the last. I am still rolling when the horizon tips past the place where training manuals end and instinct begins. The go-around has become a wrestling match with physics. Thrust is high, voices are low, and the tail, my neighborhood, speaks in a grammar of vibration that no checklist can translate. I feel the airplane move through attitudes that make cups float against their lids and shoulder harnesses bite into collars. The first officer flies with everything from fingertips to shoulders, every tendon drafted into service. The captain feeds him power like a cardiologist pacing a heart. The world in here has reorganized. Up and down are no longer compass points but negotiations. Loose items that used to complain on floors now rattle against ceilings. Somewhere a bin latch takes one last protest before it holds. Somewhere a pen becomes an arrow and then a memory. The engines keep their song, indifferent to orientation, loyal only to airflow. It is an honest sound. It tells me we're still in the fight. They refuse the trap of the runway, refuse the seduction of concrete that says, just finish it. Instead, they take the sky again and pay for time with fuel and patience. The controllers clear a corridor as wide as belief. Vectors, arc us back over open water, black and glassy in the falling light. The cabin is a human choir of quiet, whispered prayers, a child's small question, a stranger's hand wrapping another's knuckles and staying there. The flight attendants have moved from hosts to guardians. Their last call is the voice of practiced courage. Heads down, feet back, stay down. The words never sound routine, even though they were built to be. In the front, speech is measured in centimeters. Power, hold. There, no flourishes, just tools. The first officer keeps the wings mostly honest against a crosstalk of forces. Buffet tugging one way, yaw asking for a roll the other way. The pitch axis, a stubborn mule that recognizes only gravity's leash. The captain is everywhere at once. Throttles, rudder, the thin space between too fast to flare and too slow to command. If you laid their decisions out on the table end to end, they'd look like a bridge made of thread. But a bridge is still a bridge if it gets you across. The tail's voice deepens. What once felt like grit in the hinge now feels like something that was threaded, deciding it prefers to be smooth. I don't need sightlines to understand what that means. The nose keeps wanting down. The elevator keeps saying, "Not yet." The elevator is strong, hydraulically assisted and honest, but it was never designed to be the only adult in the room. They tried to keep the picture in a holdable place, speed where the controls still bite, attitude that keeps the wings useful, configuration frozen so the airplane doesn't ask the stabilizer for favors it can't deliver. It nearly works. In that almost, I capture the purest form of airmanship I've ever held, two people making 1,000 good micro-choices in a narrow hallway of possible. Then, the hallway kinks. The left wing relaxes when it should be firm. Not a dramatic stall, not a textbook break, just a shrug that transmits through the yoke into bone. Corrected. The right tries the same trick, a jealous sibling demanding attention. Corrected again. The nose uses the moment to press into its old argument. Pitch angle tightens toward what no one wants. Speed climbs where no one asked it to go. The airframe writes its discontent into the cabin, a drum roll on panels and fittings. From my mount in the tail, I feel the airplane pass through the frame, where inversion is no longer an insult, but a fact. The world inverts, not with a bang, but with a relabeling of directions. They fly it anyway. In the upside-down world, some rules survive. Wings still lift if you ask them kindly, at the right speed and angle. Control surfaces still have leverage if the flow over them is honest. The first officer keeps the bank from walking off into a spin. The captain holds power where it gives authority without overstretching the margins. Their words are metronome beats for hands and feet. Even inverted, there is craft in what they do, craft visible only to the instruments and to me. For a handful of heartbeats, recovery is not fantasy. The roll slows. The nose grudgingly rises toward less wrong. If you paused the tape here and showed it to someone who knows air, they'd tell you this is what hard saves look like. Ugly, but alive. But the tail still owes a debt. It pays in failure, slow at first and then definitive, a grind that is more absence than sound. The stabilizer's authority, already a rumor, becomes silence. The nose takes the opportunity like water, finding a crack. The pitch steepens. The engines howl a protest they can't enforce. Airspeed does what airspeed does when the nose points where it shouldn't. This is the place where words usually fail. In my world, words don't fail because I don't need them. I need only to keep. So I keep the strain of leather, the rasp of breath, the note of an engine as it meets angles its designers never drew, the collective syllable that is not a cry, but a decision. Here. Now, hold. A last attempt at turning kinetic into controlled. The ocean lifts to meet us, not malicious, just inevitable. Impact is not a single sound, it is a chord. First the surface, skin to water, a slap too fast to be liquid, too yielding to be earth. Then structure, the long bones of the airplane taking a load they cannot carry, translating motion into fracture. Then the cabin, a rain of everything that was once arranged becoming unarranged. And then, immediately, the sea. Water invades with the authority of a kingdom reclaiming a riverbed. Pressure arrives, total and convincing. I do not lose consciousness. I do not have one. I lose air. I lose light. What I gain is weight and silence. The engines spin down through octaves that sound like a cathedral being emptied. Somewhere, dim and far inside the metal, I still hear the last energy of motion turn to heat. The last small collisions of parts finding final places, then even those die out. The sea folds around us and smooths its shirt front. I was built for this part, built to survive where flesh cannot, built to carry the words and noises and choices of the last minutes through salt and time to any hand willing to learn. In the dark, I inventory myself by feel I do not have, housing intact, mounting bent but loyal, tape unspooled but protected. My tiny heart of memory still beating its unheard beat. The weight of water presses every surface. Silt settles like dust on a closed piano. Above, the world pivots instantly into emergency. Radar targets lost, scopes blooming with vectors, phones ringing into rooms full of people who practice for nights like this and always hope the night will pick someone else. Boats swing to headings. Helicopters cheat distance with rotors that promise presence even where rescue may not be possible. On shore, screens flash names and numbers. In homes and hotels and airport lounges, the news invents sentences to cover the space between uncertainty and confirmation. I do not hear any of that. I'm a stone in deep water, holding a story under pressure. Time changes shape down here. Minutes expand, currents become slow animals, nudging metal and memory across the seabed a finger's width at a time. I learn the language of tide without ears, how it pushes and releases, how it lifts a thing a breath off the sand and settles it with a sigh. I feel the distant thump of a hull above, a noise like thunder that has forgotten the sky. Light passes sometimes, thin, green, skittering like spilled mercury when a searchlight happens to sweep exactly where I sleep. If I could will anything, it would be this, that I be found. Not for my sake, I am content to do the one job I was born for, but for theirs. The pilots who made 1,000 right calls in a room, losing options. The crew who turned fear into instruction with voices that steadied strangers. The passengers whose ordinary day asked for an extraordinary measure of grace. The families whose hours are now measured by the speed of official words. The engineers and mechanics and regulators who will one day take me apart, sound by sound, and find in me not ghosts, but guidance. I do not rust in a day. I will not forget in a year. I was built to endure the kind of quiet that would erase softer things. Somewhere above on a map, someone has drawn a circle around a patch of ocean and written a number next to it. In that circle, divers will descend with lines and plans and respect. They will move methodically, the way pilots talk when stakes are tall. They will find pieces heavy and pieces light. One of those pieces will be me. Until then, I keep the last moments before the fall like a candle cupped against wind, not for spectacle, for truth, and for the promise that what is learned from truth can turn into lives not lost on some later winter afternoon when another airplane asks for mercy and receives instead wisdom. Down here, the world is pressure and patience. After the violence, a strange order asserts itself. Fragments find resting places, silt lifts, turns the water milk white, and then drifts down like a decision. I am not lungs or eyes. I am aluminum, tape, a shock-mounted heart that refuses to stop keeping. When my power rails feel the cold sea, a different duty wakes. The emergency beeper bolted to my case begins its metronome. One short pulse every second, a steady 37.5 kilohertz you can't hear, but a hydrophone can. It is the simplest thing in a night full of complicated losses. I announce again and again, I am here. The ocean answers with indifference. But on the surface, people are the opposite of indifferent. Engines rattle awake on cutters and helicopters. A Coast Guard radio becomes a lifeline of coordinates and commands, voices clipped thin to fit through static. Search grids bloom across charts, squares and sweeps and arcs laid over a patch of Pacific that yesterday was just a winter postcard. Pilots of other airplanes, still aloft and listening, bow their heads into microphones and offer sharp eyes if they're vectored close. Fishermen on the night water scan with spotlights meant for squid and sea instead. What the sea gives back when a sky machine touches it wrong. Seat cushions, a smear of fuel shimmering like an oil paint sky. A passport page that stopped telling a story. I don't hear the radios. I feel the hull thumps when boats pass above. The noise comes down through 100 feet of water as a low drum. Once light finds me, the colorless searching beam of a helicopter's belly light, turning the sea into green glass for a heartbeat before moving on. The beam doesn't know where to rest. It is a net without a catch. In the dark again, I go back to tick, tick, tick. Battery for 30 days if the cold is kind. A month of patience is a long time if you're waiting for a voice. It is nothing if you are the voice waiting to be heard. In offices with fluorescent ceilings and carpeting that dulls footfalls, phones begin their own kind of ocean. Manifest spreadsheets open, names become lists, lists become calls. Alaska Airlines builds an island inside an airport. Quiet rooms, counselors, coffee that goes cold untouched. In Seattle and Los Angeles, someone puts out markers and tissues on folding tables because the small kindnesses are the only ones available in the first hours. A young employee, trained for customer service, now learns how to say the hardest sentence softly enough that a human can receive it without shattering. Families converge, parents too still, spouses with breath trapped high in their chests, children with faces that refuse to understand this new grammar of absence. They ask whether there were survivors. The honest answer buried in the salt water is no. But answers arrive by protocol, in measured steps, because even truth needs a steady hand. The newsrooms write headlines before the verbs are fully confirmed. A microphone waits outside the airline's headquarters. Cameras drink the reflected light of police tape and cones and cold night concrete. Airline executives, faces lit from below by lecterns and the ache of responsibility, make their first statements. What is known, the route, the time, the aircraft type. What is unknown, everything that matters most. And what will be done, family care, cooperation, investigation. A country leans toward screens the way it leaned toward radio decades ago, trying to understand how an ordinary afternoon became a punctuation mark. Out on the water, the search turns into recovery. Buoys mark where debris fields bloom. Sonar paints its grayscale pictures of the floor, shapes that need names. A Navy salvage ship takes station with cranes like prayerful arms. ROVs, robotic submersibles, go down on tethers, cameras blinking in the dark like a small constellation. The pilots of those machines learn the terrain of our last minutes by feel, like fingers reading braille. A wing rib here, a galley cart there, a twisted stanchion from a seat that once held a person thinking about connection times and dinners and tomorrow's errands. The ocean keeps most of it, but not without a fight from the people above. What I know of all this is secondhand, the way a drumskin knows a song from vibration alone. What I do know directly is my own steady calling. The pinger's pulse is invisible but real, like a heartbeat on an EKG that only specialists can interpret. Teams drop hydrophones and sweep. The sound gets louder in one direction, quieter in another. They triangulate. Mathematics starts to narrow what grief has blown wide open. When the ROV's camera finally skims over my section of tail, the picture is not romantic. Silted over structure, torn edges, a geometry you would never draw on purpose. And there, me, a small, stubborn box with paint scuffed by 1,000 hours of vibration and a single hour of catastrophe. A manipulator arm inches forward like a careful hand setting a glass on a shelf. It does not hurry. Hurrying is how you lose the only voice the dead have left. As they lift me, the pressure eases. The water plucks at my case on the way up, unwilling to surrender even trinkets. I breach into air under floodlights, everything jeweled with salt. Crew on deck cheer, not with triumph, but with relief that sounds like a human exhale heard after you didn't realize you were holding your own breath. I'm rinsed, logged, crated, flown. In the cargo belly of a different airplane, I lie in the quiet company of tools and paperwork, headed to a lab where rooms smell faintly of solvent and old coffee and concentration. There, people with badge access and steady hands make a still life out of work. Stainless benches, anti-static mats, schematic printouts taped to cabinets, photos from other investigations pinned where eyes can fall on them and remember why patience is holy. My case is opened not with curiosity, but with respect. Salt has started its slow campaign. They arrest it with freshwater baths and careful drying. The tape is removed, inch by delicate inch, as if a long sentence could be unspooled and laid flat. It is not played in a consumer machine. It is coaxed by devices that know how to hold fragile history by the edges. Engineers listen first with instruments, then with ears. The waveform is a landscape, the voices are back, flight numbers, altitudes, checklists, the brief jokes that make hard jobs human. And then the day turning, the trim that wouldn't, the tests, the decision to divert, the fall, the save, the fall again. While the lab works, the other box, the flight data recorder, tells its own story in numbers. Pitch, roll, speed, control positions, thousands of parameters that make a skeleton for my flesh of sound. Investigators build a timeline on wall-length paper, minute marks, red thread for major events, yellow for subtleties, blue for questions. Grainy prints from the ROV get taped beside them. A single word becomes the slope under every other. Why? Family members will one day be invited to see some of this, not because spectacle heals, but because truth sometimes does. They will be told that the voices were professional to the end, that the crew fought for every life in the seats behind them, that the last human sounds were not chaos but craft. This matters. It does not bring anyone home. It brings them honor. For some, honor is an inadequate fraction of comfort. For others, it is the only part they can hold without breaking. Back on the ocean, divers and sailors continue their choreography. They mark and lift, finding not closure, but completion. Enough to know, enough to learn, enough to prevent. The water keeps its privacy. The people keep their promise. In a hangar that smells like oil and cardboard, the pieces are laid out on a grid. Investigators walk along the rows, as if moving through a museum that refuses to be a museum. They make notes when a fracture face tells a story, when a thread looks polished where it should be sharp, when metal speaks the slow language of wear. Through it all, I do what I was born to do. I keep. Not just the last minutes, but the tone of them. Not just the words, but the character beneath the words. A recorder is a mirror. The worth is in what it reflects. In my coils, courage is as real as altitude, judgment as measurable as speed. That will matter later, when safety advisories become directives, when maintenance intervals move, when a single threaded part inherits the gravity of a cautionary tale. For now, the beat that defined my first hours in the dark grows fainter, battery meeting its design limit, with the punctuality engineers trust. I don't need it anymore. I'm on a bench under human light, my sounds pouring into headphones and then into transcripts that will be read, reviewed, argued, understood. The ocean has given me up. The future has taken me in. The night of the accident becomes the first morning after. Fog holds to the waterline. News vans doze outside buildings that never asked to be famous. In homes far from any coast, alarms go off and people wake into a world fractionally changed. Somewhere, strangers met gravity with bravery, and somewhere else, strangers went into the dark to listen for the faintest tick that could bring meaning back. If machines can be grateful, I am. Not for rescue, that word belongs to flesh, but for retrieval. for the human insistence that nothing important should be left on the bottom if bringing it up can save a life not yet counted. I am only a box, but inside me is a promise, the kind you make silently when you put your name on a checklist, when you brief a cabin, when you drop a hydrophone and wait. We will know what happened, we will learn, and if learning is a memorial, then this investigation is the beginning of a monument no storm can topple. They set me on a stainless table under light that never flickers. Across the room, the flight data recorder breathes out numbers while I give back voices. Investigators stand in pairs, pencils ready, listening with the kind of attention you only see in operating rooms and watchmakers. They don't rush. They rewind in inches, not minutes. I feel the world lean in each time a tiny syllable adds contour to the picture, a checklist word, a systems note, a breath caught and released. On another bench, the tail's heart, the stabilizer jack screw, and the bronze nut that should have loved it for a lifetime, arrives from the ocean with salt still drying on the threads. If I had eyes, I would look away. They are naked truths. Here is what the metal says. Even before anyone puts it under a microscope, a steel screw with helical teeth, an acme-threaded shaft that, when turned by its motor, moves the horizontal stabilizer to trim the airplane. The nut, soft bronze by design, wears instead of the screw wearing, like brake pads giving themselves up to protect a rotor. Lubrication is the marriage counselor in this relationship. Without it, friction turns love into abrasion, and abrasion into absence. On my table, voices recount a morning like any other. On their table, absence is visible. They do not guess. They measure. My words give the when, the numbers give the how fast and how far, the parts give the why. Magnifiers go to microscopes, to scanning electron microscopes, to photographs blown so large, a single thread looks like a canyon. The fractures aren't dramatic. They're the quiet kind, polished, worn, chewed away until only slivers remain to carry the load of a jet and a winter day and the plans of 88 people. Under a lamplight, the bronze nut's internal threads look like a coastline after a century of tides. Sharp becomes smooth, smooth becomes gone. In a conference room, they stretch butcher paper along a wall and draw a timeline. My minutes anchor the left-to-right march. Departure, cruise, the first hint that the tail won't come when called, the decision to divert, the dive, the save, the second slide into the impossible. Above those marks, someone pins a photo of the jackscrew as it came from the sea. Below, they tack the last maintenance records, the task cards, the sign-offs. Highlighter blooms over particular lines, interval changes, lubrication sign-offs, end play checks. End play, a simple measurement of how much axial wiggle the jackscrew nut pair has left in its marriage. When the gap grows, you replace parts before love turns to divorce. Paper says when those checks were done and when they were due again. Metal says whether the calendar kept its promises. People in different shirts and badges arrive. Airline, manufacturer, union, regulators. No one gets to hide behind, "We're sure." The question, spoken 100 different ways, is one word long. Why? Why did a mechanism designed with margins end up with none? Why did a crew trained for failure run out of runway in the sky? Why did the bronze threads wear to nothing on a machine that had asked for little more than grease and attention? I cannot answer policy. I can only answer what I heard, but my answers push the room toward theirs. My tape shows how early the crew recognized a jam. It captures their restraint, their decision not to manhandle a tail that wasn't listening until they were slower and lower. It records the moment the jam freed and the airplane lunged, the geometry of a stabilizer likely trim-biased nose down, now free to go where gravity and aerodynamics favored. It holds, in their ordinary sentences, the extraordinary calm of two people riding a machine to its limits without lies. The numbers beside me tell the same story in digits. The metal makes it physical. The conversations that follow are not theatrical. They are stubborn. Engineers point to drawings and tolerances. Maintenance experts point to intervals and task design. Mechanics point to real hangars where real nights are too short and real airplanes line up for service. A regulator points to approval memos where interval extensions were authorized, longer between lubrications, longer between end play checks. Because data at the time said it was safe and efficiency cheered. The manufacturer points to the design's long record and to warnings that procedures must be done by the book. The airline points to the book it followed. The union points to the human reality of checklists on paper colliding with clock and workload. No one leaves the room clean. That is not the point. The point is to make the next room cleaner. Families come to a briefing in a hotel ballroom where chairs are set too close and the air is too cold. They are greeted with gentleness and diagrams. A woman sits with a photo of a man in a flannel shirt, paper clipped to her notebook, as if paper could tie him to this day. A boy in a suit too big watches an animation where a bronze nut's threads disappear, turning motion into freefall. Someone asks if the pilots panicked. The answer, delivered with something close to reverence, is that they did not. Someone asks if anyone suffered. The answer, truthful and breaking, is that everyone behind the cockpit door trusted the front office to the end, and the front office earned that trust, even in a losing fight. Mercy sometimes looks like professionalism. Hearing rooms fill next, microphones breathe in. The world outside wants villains and saviors. Inside, the story refuses to be that simple. Testimony stacks in careful layers. The jack screw assembly displayed like a relic, a projection of thread cross-sections where edges have turned to arcs, maintenance logs with strokes of pen and initials that were ordinary on ordinary nights. You could point to a meeting years before when someone signed off on stretching a lubrication interval, to a day in a hangar when a mechanic couldn't reach the nut with grease as easily as the task card implied, to a line check where the end play reading was acceptable by the numbers but would look ominous in hindsight. You could point to all of it and still need to point to culture, the force field that surrounds a system and tilts decisions towards schedule or safety. Culture doesn't leave fingerprints, it leaves patterns. Back in the lab, I finished telling my part. They transcribe every word and pause. They note the tones, calm, strained, resolute. They time the events to the 10th, marrying sound to accelerations, to angles, to speeds. They never play me for spectacle, they play me for clarity. Later, in paragraphs that go public, they will use a handful of sentences from me and 1,000 facts from the machine. The conclusion will be clinical, because clinical can be audited. Loss of pitch control after Acme nut thread wear led to stabilizer free motion. Maintenance intervals and practices did not keep the mechanism within safe wear limits. Organizational decisions allowed risk to accumulate in teaspoons until there was a bucket. Changes begin even before paper becomes final. Airlines re-shorten intervals and retrain. Task cards get rewritten in bolder fonts with fewer ambiguities. Mechanics get tools and procedures that take into account how airplanes actually sit on hangar floors and how hands actually reach around spars and fairings. Regulators re-examine approvals granted when times were leaner and data sets were smaller. In classrooms where new pilots learn old truths, instructors point to our day and say, "You fly what you have. You don't force what won't come. You use altitude as currency." They also add a footnote for the people who will never sit in a cockpit. Prevent is better than hero. Families make memorials, a quiet plaque, a scholarship, a bench with names cut into steel that won't forget. Grief learns to walk without a limp in some houses, in others it never does. The airline's crew room hangs photos of Captain Ted Thompson and First Officer Bill Tansky, where new higher classes pass twice a day, the faces like compass roses that say, "This is the standard." Flight attendants read their names alongside their own because service turned to guardianship in a second and held steady. Airports become places where strangers pause at gate numbers and, without knowing why, feel a softness in the air. As for me, I am never reused. I am archived. In a climate-controlled cabinet, I become a quiet witness you can sign out with a badge and a reason. The new recorders use solid-state memory that laughs at magnets and salt. They ping louder and longer in dark water. Their cases have corners softened by lessons I helped teach. If I could feel pride, it would be that. Instead, I feel nothing, and that is fitting. A recorder is an absence shaped to hold presence. When the report is signed, it reads like a map of a coastline, jagged, careful, honest. It spends more words on prevention than on drama. It names names without setting them on fire. It bans certain sentences from the future. We thought the interval was fine. We assumed the grease would last. We believed training would catch the edge. It asks the system to live like a pilot on a hard day, humble, methodical, allergic to assumption, generous with margins. If you needed a single line for the metal's confession, it would be this: nothing failed suddenly. It failed the way bridges fall in stories written a rivet at a time. That is terrible news for one day and good news for all the days after, because it means 1,000 small choices can be made differently in 1,000 hangars and offices. Systems rarely betray us. We betray them by asking them to carry our wish that close enough be enough. It isn't. I began as a box that listened. I end as a box that taught. Not because I am wise, but because human beings chose to listen back, to voices soaked in salt and courage, to numbers that refused to flatter, to metal that would not lie. Out of that listening came a new set of promises, written in grease and talk and time. Some of those promises have already saved people whose names we will never know. That is the only memorial a machine can hope for, and the best one people can give. I live now on a shelf that hums softly, a climate-controlled quiet where metal remembers. People badge in to visit me the way you'd visit a library's special collection. Gloves, sign in, low voices that treat the room like a chapel. I am a box that once listened. Now I am a box people listen to. When they press play, the room becomes smaller, the hours rewind, and the sound of two pilots doing everything right fills the air like oxygen. It's not morbid. It's maintenance for the soul of an industry. Out beyond this lab, the first aftershocks don't happen in headlines. They happen in hangars. Picture a winter morning, doors rolled open, breath blowing white under sodium lights. Mechanics stand in a half circle, coffee cooling in paper cups, a supervisor with a clipboard and a new tone. We're changing how we do this, he says, not as an accusation, but as a promise. The task card on the jackscrew lubrication is thicker now, bigger print, clearer diagrams, tools that fit real hands working around real fairings. Someone rolls a cart up with a new torque wrench, still smelling like oil and cardboard. A lid tech shows end play checks the way a guitar teacher shows a chord. Fingers here, feel this, listen for that. No one jokes. Grease is suddenly not just grease, it's a vote. In a simulator building that looks like any office park until the doors open and the motion bases tilt like whales, instructors load a profile that didn't exist last year. They brief it in simple words that carry heavy freight: jammed stabilizer, abnormal trim, control forces, energy management. The sim winds up and the cockpit rocks into a winter afternoon over water. A captain in his 50s reaches for habits. The instructor raises an eyebrow that says, "Fly what you have." The first officer, not far removed from line check, reads the checklist with a cadence borrowed from men he's never met. They practice the go-around that isn't on any glamorous poster, messy, honest, muscle and judgment. When they step out, sweat darkens their collars. The debrief is clinical and kind. Someone says, "That crew set the bar," and the room nods in a single quiet motion. Flight attendants, too, gather in a mock cabin with aisle floors scuffed by thousands of pretend services. An instructor in navy blue stands by a jump seat and says the words no one says lightly: brace positions, commands, passenger management during an upset. They rehearse voices that turn fear into action. Heads down, feet back, stay down. They talk about how to be both human and steel when the interphone comes alive and the front office says the landing might be firm. Later, over microwave noodles and laughter that sounds like relief, someone mentions the names, Ted Thompson, Bill Tansky, and everyone falls silent for a heartbeat. You don't need to have worn wings to understand debt. Air traffic controllers in a dark room with scopes like illuminated ponds run their own after-action. What it felt like to clear the sky for one flight, to draw a corridor out of vectors and will. A supervisor pulls a log and says, "If they ask for water, give them water. If they ask for time, give them time. If they don't ask, offer." The difference between routine and rescue is sometimes just tone. They practice that too. In an airline office where hallways once smelled like new carpet and now smell like coffee gone old from too many meetings, a safety manager tapes a blown-up photo of a thread profile to a wall. Around it, she writes verbs: lubricate, measure, replace, verify, escalate. Culture hides in verbs, and today's verbs lean toward prudence. Another manager brings in a stack of maintenance sign-offs flagged with bright tabs. The discussion isn't about blame, it's about bandwidth. If you want tasks done with love, you staff with time. Schedules get sanded around the edges to make room for method. It's not glamorous. It is the sound of an organization learning to breathe through its nose. Families build their own rituals. In Seattle and Los Angeles and towns that never asked to be connected by grief, living rooms turn into galleries for a while. A frame goes up on a mantle. A sweatshirt stays on a chair for weeks because that's where he left it. Because to move it is to admit time is real. A daughter prints out a page of my transcript she found summarized in the paper, not the terrible end, but the beginning, where the voices are calm and the plan is tidy, and tucks it in a diary beside a ticket stub. She underlines a line about diverting as a precaution and writes, "They were careful. On the day of the memorial, her shoes are a half size too big." She walks carefully anyway. A memorial service gathers by water because it feels right. Names are read until the syllables feel like beads in a rosary, each one small and hard and precious. The microphone picks up the sound of gulls and flags. The airline's people come in uniform and in street clothes. The company's leaders come without podium polish, eyes rimmed red in the corners where cameras don't reach. A pastor talks about steadfast hearts. A rabbi talks about remembrance as duty. A friend tells a story about a laugh that always arrived early. When the flowers touch the surface and spread, the ocean takes them without commentary. Movement, then stillness. The oldest rhythm. Back in the lab, engineers finished translating my iron oxide memory into typed lines and graphs. The official report sharpens from drafts into pages with spine. It points to parts and practices, to threads worn to ghosts, to the math of intervals that turn generous and then turn thin. That document travels further than I ever will, into FAA bulletins, airline manuals, the pockets of mechanics, the kitchens of families who need an answer their hearts can fit around. It doesn't put anyone on trial, it puts habits on notice. The sentence that matters most is the quiet one: preventable. In a hangar at midnight, a mechanic hums tunelessly while his flashlight throws a long oval across a tail cone. He learned aircraft on the job from a man who could hear a bearing by feel. Tonight he moves slower on purpose, counting turns out loud in a whisper as he cleans threads and lays grease with a respect he reserves for baptism and torque. The line check will pass because science says so and because pride demands it. Before he signs, he stops and simply looks. No rush, no assumption. Good, he says to the metal, and the word lands with a weight his pen can't carry alone. Pilots take small souvenirs you can't hold, a sticker on a flight bag with a number that isn't their employee ID, a line in a personal checklist: never hurry the tail. In quiet moments, at 3 a.m., Over Nevada, they think about a pair of voices they've only met through speakers and feel less alone. New hires hear the story on day 2, not as a warning, but as a welcome into a culture where stories save lives. Somewhere, a captain refuses a release for a maintenance issue that could wait until the next station and takes the glare that comes with costing money. He quotes the report without needing to add a citation. The glare softens. The airplane stays. And the public, people who touch airplanes only with shoes and hopes, change in tiny ways they may not notice. A stranger listens to a safety demo with attention he would have mocked last year. A passenger tightens a belt when the sign dings instead of bargaining with the universe about why she's special. A man who once rolled his eyes at flight attendants handing out instructions now sees guardians where he used to see waiters. A child in 18A, face to the window, watches the wing flex and decides physics is a kind of kindness. I am asked for less and less in person as the years move. Solid-state recorders take my place in bellies and tails, laugh at salt water, ping longer, store more. I don't mind. This is the best kind of redundancy, the kind where your obsolescence is the price of safer days. When I do get brought out, it's to show a class of new investigators what humility looks like in a box. An instructor taps my case with 2 fingers like you might knock on wood and says, "This is memory as a safety device." The students lean in. Some cry and pretend they didn't. I'm happy to be useful even when quiet. If you want to know the scale of the aftershocks, don't count only tests and task cards, count the absences. The news stories never written because a tale was slick with the right grease, the emergency declarations that stayed theoretical because a lever moved easily when asked. The families who never gathered in ballrooms because a mechanic didn't round up, a pilot didn't press on, a manager didn't trim a margin. Absence rarely gets credit. But out on the line, in the tower, at the gate, in the row of jump seats, people keep paying into the bank of absence with discipline. I'm only a recorder. I don't forgive and I don't accuse. I keep. And in keeping, I help people choose differently when they must. If you're wondering whether that matters, walk through any airport and listen. You'll hear it in how a gate agent explains a delay with more truth than spin. You'll hear it in how a captain's voice stays level when he says, "Folks, we're going to make a precautionary landing and we'll keep you posted." You'll hear it in how a mechanic whistles in a hangar at 2 a.m. because the job takes the time it takes. You'll hear it in how a flight attendant kneels in an aisle to meet a scared passenger's eyes and say, "I've got you." All of those sounds are the aftershocks of one day. They are quieter than impact. They are louder than regret. I used to measure victory in hours recorded. I measure it differently now. In miles flown by strangers I'll never meet. On airplanes that never speak my language because nothing asked them to. If there is a legacy in aluminum and ink and oxygen and water, it is simply this. Memory used right becomes margin. Margin becomes mercy. Mercy becomes arrival. I live now in a hush that hums, a room built to keep memory at the right temperature and humility at the right pitch. When people badge in and unbox me, they don't touch the past so much as ask it to teach them one more time. On the days I stay shelved, the story leaves without me. In manuals rewritten, in task cards thicker than the old ones, in check rides where the sim throws the kind of curve no one thinks is fair until the day the curve saves a cabin full of strangers. That's the quiet work. The louder work is done with names. There is a ceremony by the water, not the first, not the last. Folding chairs, a lectern that leans a little on the wooden planks, flags that snap when the wind remembers. People arrive in clumps, crew in uniform and crew in jeans, mechanics with grease ghosts under their nails, controllers with sunburned noses, families carrying frames and flowers, and the sort of strength that doesn't advertise itself. Names are read. It takes the time it takes. The syllables don't sink, they float on the air and then settle into the water like petals. A little girl holds a paper boat with Dad, printed in block letters, and when it tips away from her hand, she gasps, the tiny, reflexive sound of letting go, and then smiles, because even paper can look brave when it knows what it's for. In hearing rooms with microphones that make everyone sound a shade more official than they feel, people continue telling truths. Engineers bring posters of thread profiles the size of doorways. A maintenance lead brings a task card and a grease gun and says softly, "This is what it's like at 2 in the morning when you're on your back and the clock is hungry." A union rep says culture is a tool or a weapon depending on who holds it. An airline executive admits that intervals stretched in lean years can become habits in fat ones if no one writes a rule that says, "Stop." A regulator promises to make that rule. In the pauses, the air hums with a single shared idea, never again, and not by luck. In hangars, the aftershocks turn into muscle memory. A young mechanic, third generation, the kind who can tell what's wrong by how a panel vibrates under a palm, learns to treat the jackscrew like a living joint. He counts turns out loud, not because he needs to, but because the voice makes the work visible to anyone within earshot. A senior tech demonstrates end-play checks with the patience of a math teacher who loves a clean proof. Feel the slack, don't rationalize it, measure it, replace it. He taps the wrench twice against his boot and hands it over like a baton. Pilots bring the story into their own weather. In recurrent training, someone loads Puerto Vallarta to LA abnormal, and the room goes very still, because everyone knows which day we're about to climb into. They fly it with humility, not theater. Half the lesson is about energy, where to keep it, when to bleed it, how to refuse the runway when the runway is a trap. The other half is about talk, briefing that shaves the edges off fear and leaves only instruction, kindness turned into cadence. Afterward, in a lounge where coffee is always a little burnt, no one slaps backs. They just look at one another and nod as if to say, "Copy." Flight attendants practice the words that turn strangers into a team. Heads down, feet back, stay down. They script how to answer eyes that ask the one question no one can promise on a hard day. Are we going to be okay? With honesty and calm. In the back of the classroom, a wall has photos of crews who became guardians at altitude. The names from our flight are there too, not as a warning, as a blessing. I hear about new recorders. Their memories are digital, their pingers louder, their cases tuned by lessons my bruises helped teach. I do not envy them. This is an industry where being replaced is the goal. Redundancy is not insult. It is love expressed in hardware. Nearby, I share a shelf with other boxes that came up from other bodies of water and other fields. We don't talk, but if we did, we would agree. Our value is measured in days that never turn into nights like ours. Families do the hardest engineering. They build structures from grief that hold weight without collapsing, scholarships in names that once were whispered into playground air, benches at airports where the view is good, and the sound of departures is a kind of lullaby. Foundations that buy safety equipment and training hours and overtime for the work that can't be rushed. A mother speaks at a high school about what it means to live the phrase, "pay attention," not because airplanes might fall, but because every promise you make rests on 1,000 small hinges that require care. Teenagers shift in their seats, and for a flicker, truly hear her. The final report arrives the way winter arrives, slowly, then all at once. Pages that took months to braid together take minutes to download. It is not a thriller. It is a ledger. Findings line up like runway lights. Recommendations flare bright and stubborn. Words you could carve in steel: lubrication, inspection, end play, interval, training, culture. There is a paragraph that holds the pilot voices up to the light and says, in formal prose, what everyone who has listened already knows: they flew with discipline to the end. The room where the report is presented is professional. The rooms where it is read are personal. Kitchens, break rooms, cockpits before pushback. A pilot reads the probable cause 3 times and then underlines a sentence about accumulated risk. A mechanic prints the section on task revisions and tapes it to a locker door with blue painter's tape because it leaves no scars when the next lesson arrives. The public, meanwhile, has its own conversation. A man who used to clap when the wheels touch down now closes his eyes at 50 feet and thinks without bitterness about the chain of hands that made him safe. Designers, schedulers, cleaners, dispatchers, inspectors, pilots, controllers, attendants. He decides, unilaterally, to start listening to the safety demo. A woman who hates flying learns the ritual of breathing in for 4, out for 6, and marvels at how much calmer the sky looks when you can see the work in it. And there is art too. A photographer stands on a bluff as the sun bleeds into an ocean that knows everyone's secrets and takes a picture of light on water. The caption is a date and a flight number. No commentary. People who know. A songwriter writes about an ordinary morning that became a thunderclap and chooses not to record it because the quiet is part of the point. A sculptor welds names into a curve that looks like a wing, then sandblasts it until the letters feel like the inside of a shell. Soft, even when you know they're stone. I am asked to play sometimes for rooms that need reminding. Not the audio, never for spectacle, but the steady technical cadence that says, here is how professionals sound in the moment when a system stops cooperating. Hearing it resets spines. It also refutes lies. The easy lie is that heroism is loud. The harder truth is that heroism often sounds like two voices keeping procedure warm while physics growls at the door. What do I miss? Nothing. I wasn't built for before or after. I was built for during. Yet if there is one scene I return to in the dark of the cabinet, it is small and human. A mechanic at 0240, jaw rough with stubble, wiping a thread clean and laying grease with a tenderness he doesn't advertise, whispering "good" to metal because he has decided to be the last line, not the first excuse. That is what the name's bought. Not a single monument, but a million unremarked acts of care. If you want a single thesis for the years after, it fits on a post-it. Memory, margin, mercy. Remembering correctly gives you room. Room gives you the chance to choose kindness over catastrophe. A recorder can't make that choice. People can. People did. People do. I was built to end in silence. After all the alarms and voices and engines and wind, I was always meant to come back to a room where nothing moves unless a human hand asks it to. On my shelf, the air is even and the light is honest. Somewhere outside, an MD-83 lifts off with a cabin full of small plans, text messages, a book half read, a promise to call when they land, and I do not stir. That is the point. Safety is a quiet that never boasts. When they take me down now, it's not to ask what happened on January 31st, 2000. We know that. The metal confessed, the numbers agreed, the voices proved the character of 2 pilots and a crew who answered the worst day with their best selves. What people want from me, this far out, is something harder to pin to a diagram. Proof that memory can be converted into margin and margin into mercy. They bring in new apprentices, engineers with soft hands that will be strong by winter, mechanics with eyes that look first and talk second, pilots who still carry the simulator's motion in their legs. The instructor taps my case and tells a short story with a long shadow. He doesn't need me to play. He only needs me to be. In those classes, I hear lines that used to be slogans become habits. Fly what you have. Respect the tail. Energy is currency. In the back, a veteran raises a hand and says the most devout sentence I know in this business. Let's brief it again. The room leans forward, the way we once leaned forward in a cockpit over the Pacific. Repetition is not superstition. It's a net. I have learned how grief makes engineers. A mother signs a check to endow a scholarship for A&P students who promise to count turns out loud. A son speaks at a safety conference where the coffee is bad and the intentions are good. He holds a photo of a smile and says, "When you tighten a fastener, tighten it for her." A captain stops a pushback over a maintenance entry that could wait and takes the frown on the radio because he remembers two voices he never met. A regulator puts ink on a page that makes a future argument shorter. None of these gestures wear capes. All of them keep airplanes in the sky. I keep hearing the ocean, even in a lab, not because I miss it, but because water is a teacher, patient, precise, undefeated. It taught me that pressure finds weakness and time finds truth. The weak spot on our day was not courage. It was a thread that asked for grease and got faith instead. Faith is not a lubricant. Grease is. That is not poetry. It's the grammar of survival. There is a memorial by the water, the sort of place where wind edits every sentence down to its essentials. Names arc in steel, shadows of letters move across the ground like time-lapse clouds. Families visit with flowers or with empty hands and stay as long as they need to. Pilots stop on their way to report times and read quietly, lips moving. Mechanics come on lunch breaks and stand with one foot turned under, like they're in a hangar. Not because they're casual, but because that's how their bodies think when their hearts are listening. Tourists find the plaque by accident and lower their voices without knowing why. The ocean does what it always does: take, give, keep the surface calm. If you ask what changed because of that winter afternoon, I could show you bulletins and task cards, inspection intervals and training modules, new recorder casings and pinging hearts that now beat longer in deep water. But numbers, while essential, are not the whole answer. The deeper change is invisible, a shift in posture, heads a little lower in humility, spines a little straighter in resolve, hands a little slower when slow is wiser. Culture is a machine you build every day out of words and glances and what you tolerate. On January 31st, 2000, we learned again how much a single tolerance matters. Sometimes a school calls and asks to borrow me for a ceremony. They set me beside a lectern that's been to too many weddings and not enough memorials. A student reads the names. Another reads a paragraph from a report that would put a stranger to sleep, but makes these kids sit forward. An instructor places a small wrench by my side, as if a box like me could ever need it. "We're not here to be sad," she says. "We're here to be accurate." In this work, accuracy is a form of love. In a drawer across the aisle, there is a cassette from another airplane, another story. On a different shelf, a solid-state memory chip from a case that never touched the sea. We are cousins, mute until needed, then inexhaustible. The best compliment anyone can pay us is to leave us bored. You want us to die of neglect, not duty. You want us to sit here until the glue in our labels dries out and the tape print fades, and a curator 30 years from now has to look up how to boot the interface. You want us to become antiques in a future so safe that the young find it hard to believe we were once necessary. But necessary we were, and necessary we will be, because aviation is a covenant written in math and kept in character. The math says you can engineer out most surprises. The character says you will act properly when the remainder arrives anyway. My part in the covenant is small and shamelessly unromantic. I keep the receipt. This is what was said. This is what was done. When the bill comes due, when a jury of peers or a table of investigators or a class of new hires asks what really happened, I can show them without flinching. When I try to define arrival for myself, it is not wheels on concrete. It's the slow, stubborn way truth gets accepted into policy and then into muscle. It's the way a manager says, "Take the time," and means it. It's the way a young FO says, "Let's brief the go-around," before a clear blue sky approach, and the captain says, "Yes." It's the way a flight attendant puts a hand on a shoulder and says, "I've got you," and means more than calm. It's the way a mechanic wipes a thread clean and whispers, "Good," to metal, not for luck, but for focus. Arrival is the day a small hinge does not fail because hands remembered. If you need a benediction, take this one. The names do not sink. The lesson does not fade. The sky does not forgive, but people can. By preparing so well that forgiveness is rarely needed. I was a witness. You are the authors now. Write the next chapters in checklist ink and unhurried grease and voices that never lie. Landings are brief. Safety is a long arrival. Keep arriving.